Hello? My name is Peyton, and I was called a threat by my own brother, in open court, just seconds after he slapped me across the face. They cuffed my hands like I was dangerous. They watched like they agreed. But the truth, I was the one investigating him. For 6 months. The worst part wasn't the slap. It was how no one stood up. Not my father, not my cousins, not even the woman who once called me her daughter. They all watched. They all stayed silent. But what if the silence was never just apathy? What if it was planned? What if they needed me to be invisible for everything they built to survive? The second he said my name, the air inside the courtroom shifted. So sudden, so sharp, you could almost hear it cut across the ceiling tiles. Ms. Quinn, representing CIA Oversight Division? The room didn't gasp. No one screamed. But every neck turned, every head tilted, every breath held. And for once, no one looked at Marshall. They looked at me. I didn't confirm it. I didn't nod or deny. I let the words hang there, bare and uncomfortable, like truth often is. My lips still throbbed from where he hit me. Blood had dried along the corner of my mouth, but I hadn't wiped it off. Let them see. Let them remember what silence looked like, what injustice left behind. Marshall's jaw twitched. He looked at the judge like the man had spoken in tongues. "She's lying," he said, too fast, too flat. "She's not with them. She's here on trial for obstruction." The judge didn't blink. "That'll be determined in due time." That's when they moved. 2 bailiffs, one on either side of me. Not rough, not aggressive, just routine. One reached for my wrist, as if somehow this was standard procedure. The other took my bag. "You're not authorized to search that," I said. "Standard procedure for flagged individuals," Marshall muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He knew what he was doing. Strip me bare in public. Not with a weapon, but with a label. Threat. Unstable. Dangerous. My fingers tightened into a fist, still cuffed. They dumped my belongings across the table. Pens, a granola bar, a picture, creased down the middle, of me at 16 standing beside my mother. It slid to the floor. The bailiff didn't pick it up. Marshall stepped on it. Not a stomp, just walked over it. Deliberate, familiar. The kind of cruelty that doesn't scream. It whispers, "You don't matter." No one said a word. The judge didn't stop it. My court-appointed attorney gave a half-hearted, "Your Honor," that trailed off before it reached its point. I sat still, breathing in the fluorescent hum and recycled air. The room smelled like mold and old paper. That's when I saw him. Lorcan, back row, still, silent. He didn't look surprised. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching everything unfold like a man who'd seen this play before and hated how familiar it felt. I bent down and gathered the photo myself, brushed the dirt from it, folded it back into my bag without a word. The cuffs didn't make it easy, but I'd learned how to work around restraints a long time ago. People think silence is weakness, but silence can be armor. When I straightened, the judge turned back to me. "Do you have anything to say, Ms. Quinn?" I looked around the room, the clerk avoiding eye contact, the bailiffs returning to their posts, Marshall still watching me like he was waiting for me to crack. I said, "Only if you're all listening." He raised a brow. "Proceed." "I was brought here under false pretenses," I began. "Framed for interfering with an investigation that didn't exist. Branded a threat because I observed, not because I acted. My brother," I turned just slightly toward Marshall, "lied." He laughed. One of those short, scoffing sounds people make when they know something's slipping. "You're really going to do this here?" "I'm not doing anything, Marshall. I'm just not hiding anymore." He leaned forward. "You know what this makes you look like?" "Yes," I said. "And you know what it makes you look like?" The judge slammed his gavel once. "Enough. Mr. Creed, control yourself." Marshall didn't move. His eyes were locked on me now, not cold, but calculating, like he'd misjudged a variable and couldn't figure out which. I sat back down. My wrists still ached. My lips still stung, but I wasn't small anymore. The courtroom returned to its rhythm. Motions, paperwork, the scraping of chairs and the clack of shoes on tile. But something had shifted. They didn't see me as the problem anymore. They saw me. Only if you're all listening. I let the words hang there for a second longer than necessary. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that asks for attention. It demanded it. The judge didn't nod, didn't lean forward. He simply raised his brow and said, "Proceed." I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I exhaled slowly and glanced toward the gallery, scanning the familiar and unfamiliar faces. No one moved. No one blinked. If I was waiting for someone to rise, to protest the circus unraveling around me, I'd be waiting a long time. Marshall cleared his throat behind me, loud enough for it to register as a challenge. "That badge don't excuse what she's done," he muttered toward the judge. He always knew how to slide a blade with a smile, how to turn accusation into authority. The judge didn't address him. He looked at the bailiff, gave a small nod, and just like that, they came for my bag. No explanation, no legal basis, just motion wrapped in protocol. One grabbed it from the table where it had been tossed. The other stood beside me as if I was going to explode. "Is this really necessary?" my court-appointed lawyer asked, with all the fire of a wet sponge. Marshall responded for them. "We've had reason to believe she's carrying unauthorized surveillance gear." That was rich. The bailiff unzipped the front pocket first, dumping out a notebook, 2 pens, and a sealed sandwich wrapped in foil. It hit the floor with a muted plop. No one picked it up. The larger compartment came next. Papers, receipts, a USB drive still in its cap. Nothing fancy, nothing weaponized. And then the photo. It fluttered out like a feather, landing just beside Marshall's boot. It was old, faded from years at the bottom of a drawer. Me and my mother. I must have been 16. We were standing in front of our old porch, smiling with our eyes, not our mouths. Marshall looked down at it. Then, deliberately, he stepped forward. And stepped on it. Not with force, not with flair. Just weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just watched his boot press into the only copy I had of the last day she told me she was proud. I bent forward to retrieve it myself. My wrists were still cuffed, but I managed. My fingers were slow, careful. I wiped the corner of the photo with my sleeve, folded it, and tucked it back into my bag. The room remained still, not frozen out of fear, but out of indifference. And that, I think, was worse. I glanced toward Lorcan. Back row, right side. He looked like he wanted to say something. His lips parted slightly. But instead, he looked down at his shoes. He used to tell me silence was strength. I used to believe him. Marshall leaned toward the bailiff. "Anything else?" "Nope," the man replied. My attorney tried again. "Judge, this search wasn't warranted, and she's still cuffed." "She assaulted a fellow officer," Marshall cut in, loud enough for the room. "No," I said, finally speaking with weight. "I didn't assault anyone. I filmed you pushing an elderly man to the ground, and that's why I'm here." A few heads in the gallery shifted. Marshall's face hardened, but his mouth didn't move. That told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't expected me to say it aloud. He hadn't expected me to speak at all. The judge sighed and turned to me. "You may remain seated. This court will resume with statements from Officer Creed." "Of course," Marshall said smoothly, slipping back into his polished tone. "We have reason to believe, Miss Quinn." I tuned him out. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew how this part went. I'd heard it all before. In every family dinner I wasn't invited to. In every graduation photo I was cropped out of. In every "you're too sensitive" and "don't make this about you." This wasn't about one slap. This was about years of being framed as the problem. The foil-wrapped sandwich still lay on the floor. A tiny absurdity in a room filled with contradictions. I reached down, picked it up, and placed it back in my bag, as if reclaiming it meant something. And maybe it did. Maybe it meant I still had control over what stayed with me. The judge glanced toward me again. Ms. Quinn, do you wish to provide your side? I looked at the room, looked at my brother, looked at the space where family used to sit with pride. Yes, I said, because sometimes the only way to break silence is to fill it with the truth. Lorcan blinked at me, once, and I knew he remembered too. That folder in his lap wasn't just paper, it was a ticking thing, a piece of history I hadn't touched in over a decade, a piece that was mine until someone decided it wasn't. I leaned back in my seat, letting my wrists rest in the cuffs. The edges of the metal had started to leave impressions on my skin, like they were trying to etch themselves into my memory. I kept my eyes on that folder, steady. I didn't dare look at Marshall, not yet. If I looked at him, I'd speak. And right now, silence was my scalpel. The judge cleared his throat. Officer Creed, please proceed with your account. Marshall didn't hesitate. Your Honor, the defendant, Ms. Quinn, interfered with an ongoing investigation, refused to comply with orders, and recorded classified material at a restricted scene. She displayed erratic behavior and showed intent to escalate. He said it with the kind of certainty only liars develop. Smooth, practiced, unshakable. I closed my eyes. And I was 22 again. I'd just gotten out of a second-round interview with a joint intelligence unit. Cross-departmental, high-level, nothing like the quiet admin work I was doing at the time. They called me a standout candidate, said they liked my eye for patterns, my ability to disappear in plain sight. I never told anyone. Not at first. When the letter came, I opened it on my porch. My mother was inside, stirring soup with one hand and holding a cordless phone to her ear with the other. I read the acceptance twice before I could breathe again. That training meant escape. It meant validation. It meant someone saw me. I told Marshall a week later. He didn't say much, just nodded, said something about how those programs chew people up. Then he offered to help me prep for the background check. Said he had experience. It wasn't until 2 months later that I learned I'd been disqualified. A family incident, they said. A file flagged by local law enforcement. I never saw the details. No one returned my calls. I didn't ask questions. I just folded in on myself and went back to the desk job. It took years to piece together what had happened. An old friend of mine from the program reached out one night, asking why I never showed. Your brother spoke highly of you, he said. Didn't realize you two were so close. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A month after that call, I found the certificate, hidden in a drawer at my parents' house, buried under church newsletters and expired coupons. It had my name scratched out in pen. Marshall's name was typed over it. He'd taken everything, not just the opportunity, the credit, the identity, the version of me that might have been more than tolerated, the version that would have been undeniable. I confronted my mother once, showed her the certificate. She looked at it for a long while. Then, without meeting my eyes, she said, he had to do what he thought was best for his future. That was the last time we talked about it. I didn't bring it up again, and she never asked why I moved out a week later. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was still talking, still rewriting the truth with that calm, clipped tone of his. He's always had that voice, I thought, the kind that makes lies sound like instructions. I adjusted the sleeve of my blouse, just slightly. The watch underneath pulsed once, a gentle rhythm against my skin. A reminder, a tether. Marshall was laying out my pattern of escalation, calling my actions calculated disobedience. I couldn't help but smirk. The irony almost made me laugh. He didn't realize how right he was. I let my eyes drift again to Lorcan. He hadn't opened the folder yet. He didn't need to. He just kept his hand on it, thumb tapping the edge in a pattern only I seemed to recognize. Slow, deliberate, familiar. Like the way he used to knock on my door when dinner was ready, back when I still lived under their roof. I don't think he meant to do it, but it grounded me. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. I felt surgical, Marshall finished speaking. The judge made a note. My lawyer shifted beside me, finally sensing the turn in the air. And I realized something then. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. This was about rewriting the part of the story I'd let him author for too long. Lorcan's lips parted, but no words came. His hand stayed flat on that manila folder, like it weighed more than paper ever should. I didn't move either. A conversation had already happened between us, wordless but sharp. Just then, my watch buzzed twice, quick, soft pulses. I shifted my wrist slightly, angling the screen beneath the table where no one else could see. A new message. I tapped to open the secured app buried beneath layers of encryption, hidden in plain sight beneath a calorie tracker. The screen lit up with a thread of screenshots. Group chat. Timestamps from the past week. Names I knew. Marshall. Aunt Cheryl. Cousin Nina. Even Lorraine, who once braided my hair while telling me I was her favorite. My name was everywhere, none of it kind. Liability. Always playing the victim. She's probably taping this right now, paranoid nutcase. Marshall should have cut her off years ago. Can't fix broken. That last one was from Lorraine. I didn't blink, didn't let the burn reach my face, but inside, something shifted. Not snapped, not shattered, settled. They weren't confused. They weren't misled. They were unified, and they'd been practicing this silence for years. I let the screen dim, then flicked my thumb across the watch's bezel, 3 soft turns counterclockwise. The signal activated beneath the surface, unseen, just enough to trigger the silent protocol we'd rehearsed only in theory. Peyton Quinn, liability. Peyton Quinn, overreacting. Peyton Quinn, listening. I looked up at Marshall, who was still basking in the sound of his own voice, spinning a tale to the judge like he was giving a Sunday sermon. My lawyer leaned in. "You've got a secure call. Should I decline?" I shook my head. He passed me the earpiece under the table, where no one else could see. I slipped it in, adjusted my hair, and answered with a tap. The voice that came through wasn't familiar, but the tone was. "You should be careful what you do next," it said. Male, neutral, too calm to be random. "Who is this?" "You've stirred things that don't like being seen. He's not alone, you know that." "And you're warning me out of concern?" I asked flatly. "No," the voice replied. "Out of pity. You're alone in that room, and they're going to bury you." He hung up before I could respond. The line dropped to static, then silence. For a second, I stared past the courtroom, into nothing, and suddenly, I wasn't 34 years old in federal cuffs. I was 13 again. It was my cousin's birthday. Everyone wore matching shirts. The banner read, "Happy Family," painted in pink glitter letters. My name wasn't on the cake. I hadn't even been in the group text to plan it. I sat at the very end of the table, a folding chair just a little shorter than the rest, paper plate in my lap, plastic fork. No one spoke to me, not even when I dropped my cup of juice on my lap and whispered for a napkin. They didn't just overlook me, they coordinated it. That memory never really went away, it just got layered beneath louder ones. But today, that silence was back. And this time, I was ready for it. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was talking about patterns of behavior. Of course he was. He always needed a script to play hero. I watched the judge nod along, not convinced, but unmoved, same as always. And the gallery? Quiet as a funeral, until Lorcan moved again. He uncrossed his legs, sat upright, placed the folder on his lap, and tapped his finger once, twice on the seal. I straightened in my seat, wrists stiff, tilted my head just a little, not asking, just watching. They had expected me to be rattled, maybe even outraged. What they didn't expect, what they never learned to read, was the quiet between my choices, the space where the rage settled into shape. I glanced down, checked the watch, still transmitting. Good. I adjusted my posture, leaned slightly toward Riley, and said in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear, "It's time." He didn't respond with words. just nodded once, then reached down and pulled the flash drive from his inside pocket. In my peripheral, Marshall froze, because maybe, just maybe, he remembered what I'd always been good at. Not yelling, just waiting. He didn't look up right away, just stared at the screen, thumb frozen mid-scroll. Marshall's mouth pressed into that familiar, disapproving line he used when trying to decide whether to explode or play it cool. He was calculating, running options through his head, testing which narrative might survive what he'd just read. I watched him from across the room, not saying a word. I didn't need to. The email had already spoken for me. It had gone out the moment Lorcan's folder changed hands. Riley had triggered it with a remote tap, same moment he slipped the flash drive into his pocket. Simple, clean, automatic. The contents, scanned documents, time-stamped messages, agency correspondence, had all been packaged into a neat little file titled Quinn Oversight.pdf. That title alone was enough to make Marshall nervous. But it wasn't the name that had him sweating. It was the evidence he never thought would surface again. The judge adjusted his glasses, clearly annoyed by the distraction. "Is there a problem, Sergeant Creed?" Marshall cleared his throat. "Just a technical issue." "You're not on the stand anymore," the judge reminded him. "If you've finished your testimony, we'll proceed." Riley stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor, we've just submitted new material to the court email, as well as to opposing counsel. We request a 10-minute recess to review and prepare a formal response." The judge didn't even look at the screen. "Motion denied. We'll continue." "Of course." Marshall gave a little smirk, as if to say, "See? Still got it." I reached down slowly and brushed my fingers along the cuff of my shirt, revealing the top edge of my matte black watch. The light had already turned green. Transmission in progress. No one saw it but me. That was the point. The documents weren't just proof of my enrollment in the cross-agency program Marshall had stolen. They included an internal note, dated 14 months ago, the day I first received the anonymous tip. A local officer with history had falsified federal placement credentials using access granted through a sibling connection. That sibling was me. At the time, I didn't know whether it was rumor or setup, but I flagged it anyway, quietly, officially. I wasn't looking for justice, not then. I just wanted to stop being the invisible one, but what I found pulled me right back in. It wasn't just the training program. He'd used my name, my background, and even sections of my security clearance form, some of it word for word, to advance himself while keeping me in the dirt. The man who called me unstable and a threat had spent years climbing ladders built on my shoulders. I rotated the bezel of my watch once. A small click sounded in my earpiece. Riley's cue. He stood again, gently clearing his throat. Per the court's acknowledgement, the defense would like to read a single paragraph from the newly submitted material. The judge leaned back with a sigh. "Proceed." Riley unfolded a printed page and read, "This letter certifies that Peyton Quinn was accepted into the Federal Cross-Agency Tactical Training Initiative in 2014, under the authorization of the Joint Committee Review Board. Any claims to the contrary are in direct violation of the applicant's federal protections under the Security Access Integrity Act." Marshall shifted. Riley continued, "Attached are comparative applications submitted under the name Marshall Creed, using phrases and language identical to Peyton Quinn's personal statements, flagged and duplicated in 3 separate forms." Now the room changed. It wasn't loud, it was slower, like wind changing direction. A few eyes turned toward Marshall. One of the assistant DAs picked up her tablet and began scrolling. I kept my voice steady. "This wasn't retaliation." Marshall snapped his head toward me. "This wasn't revenge," I continued. "It was a response. You took my name, my place, my future." He opened his mouth, too fast. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked right at him. "Don't I?" He stood. Not officially, just that casual rise that men use when they're trying to look tall without getting caught standing too fast. I worked for everything I have. No, I said. You stole what I stopped fighting for. Riley raised a hand gently. Ms. Quinn, please direct all remarks to the bench. The judge didn't intervene. Not yet. Marshall laughed, but it came out flat. This doesn't change anything. It already did, I said. The bailiff stepped closer, not because of anything said, but because they'd seen enough to feel the shift in balance. People react to tone before content. And my tone? It was no longer defensive. It was deliberate. Marshall sat down again, slower this time. The judge finally spoke. We'll recess briefly to allow time to review the submitted documents. Everyone stood. Marshall didn't. He was staring at his phone again. The bailiff leaned toward him. You might want to check your email, sir. Marshall did, and when he read what he found, he didn't smirk. He clenched his jaw. The bailiff's body shifted just enough to block Marshall's path. No raised voice, no hand on a weapon, just quiet authority, the kind that's not about volume, it's about weight. Marshall froze mid-step, eyes flicking up from the phone in his hand to the man in front of him, then to me. I didn't move. Neither did the courtroom. I could see him debating whether to shove past the bailiff and risk it all, or pretend like he'd only meant to stretch his legs. He went with the second option, because that's who Marshall is. Always pushing just far enough that it hurts, never far enough that it costs him. He cleared his throat, took a step back, and returned to his seat. The leather chair groaned under him, like it too was tired of holding his weight. I stood up without asking. The court assistant unlocked the cuffs around my wrists with a quiet click, stepping back, as if I might need the space. I didn't thank her. I didn't say a word. Instead, I picked up the folder Riley had placed on the table and walked toward the judge. Step by step, with the calm of someone who knew they weren't being dramatic. They were being deliberate. The judge looked up, mildly surprised I was moving on my own. I believe this belongs in your hands now, I said. My voice didn't waver. I placed the folder on his bench and returned to my seat. No one stopped me. No one had to anymore. Back at the defense table, I glanced at Riley. He nodded subtly, affirming that the flash drive's contents were already secured and transmitted. Marshall, meanwhile, was flipping through his phone like he could undo whatever had just landed in his inbox. But nothing on that screen was going to save him now. The folder I'd just handed the judge contained more than training records or duplicated essays. It had the application. Mine. Handwritten in my penmanship, dated, time-stamped, sealed with a digital trail stretching back to a month before Marshall ever touched it. It was the original, not a copy, a printed, notarized scan from the government archives, and it wasn't alone. Attached was a second document, a signed sworn affidavit from the agency's internal review officer. That signature was going to hurt more than anything I could say aloud. Your Honor, Riley stood again, this time with more weight behind him. We would like the court to consider this in context of not just Ms. Quinn's status, but the origin and integrity of the claims made against her. The accusations are not only retaliatory, they're built upon falsified credentials and deliberate obfuscation by a family member. Marshall shot up. This is fabricated. The judge raised a hand to stop him. You'll have a chance to respond, Officer Creed. Marshall didn't sit. You're taking her word over mine? I've served this community for 20 years. Riley calmly spoke again. And we're not questioning your years of service, sir. We're presenting evidence that you leveraged familial trust and access to remove someone from a federally approved career path, without consent, without merit. Marshall finally turned toward me. You always had to make everything about you. I didn't blink. You made me a ghost in my own life. I'm just reminding everyone I exist. The judge sat with the documents for a few seconds, flipping through each page slowly. Not skimming, reading. It was the first time since this entire thing started that someone in power was holding something with my name on it, and not tossing it aside. My mind drifted back 6 months. I was sitting in a basement office under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little dead. An alert had popped up on my secure network. A civilian complaint flagged as pattern escalation. The officer named? Marshall Creed. I hadn't said a word then, not even to Riley. I simply opened a new file and labeled it Creed Shadow Inquiry. It started with misconduct claims. Then came disciplinary inconsistencies, transfers approved without interviews, testimonials buried without follow-up. I had enough to build a case long before the slap in this courtroom. But I wasn't after a conviction. I was after confirmation. I wasn't the crazy sister. I was the one who'd stayed silent long enough to see the whole picture. Back in the courtroom, the judge looked up. "We will take a recess to review these materials further. Counsel, you may remain." As the judge exited, Riley whispered, "You good?" I nodded. This wasn't retaliation. Riley looked at me sideways. "No?" "It was containment," I said. And before Marshall could rise again, the bailiff stepped forward, blocking him. "No, it's just finally started." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The words landed like a flat stone on still water, quiet but impossible to ignore. Marshall slowed as he passed, flanked now by 2 court officers, their presence no longer symbolic but procedural. He didn't look back at me, didn't dare. Judge Carlton had barely announced the recess before Riley moved. With a nod to the clerk, he stepped over to the AV cart, tapped the screen, and cued the video. He didn't need permission. The file had already been admitted, sealed, time-stamped, and verified. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. No fanfare, just the flicker of a paused frame on the wall-mounted monitor. Grainy, time-stamped, wide angle. The camera was positioned high, likely from a business security feed. The audio was distant, but intact. And there he was. Marshall, in full uniform, arms squared, voice raised, posture tight with performance. Across from him, an older black man, gray hair, slight limp, holding a folded newspaper, and nothing else. No threat. No aggression. The video rolled. Marshall didn't ask questions. He barked orders, pointed aggressively. The man tried to explain something, couldn't be heard clearly, but his hands stayed down the whole time. Then Marshall shoved him, hard. The man stumbled back, almost into traffic. A passerby caught him before he fell. In the courtroom, a few people gasped, not loud, but enough. The kind of sound people make when they realize they've been fooled. The clip ended there. No commentary, no replay, just silence. Riley stepped back, didn't say a word. The judge looked up from his notes, and then, unexpectedly, someone else stood. A uniformed officer, sitting on the far left of the gallery. I recognized him immediately, Detective Henry Locke. Marshall's partner for more than a decade. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I filed the original report," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "It was buried, replaced with a different version. My version never saw light." The room went still again. Marshall hadn't turned around, hadn't looked at the screen, but now he did. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, voice low and thick. Locke didn't blink. "Telling the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago." Judge Carlton leaned forward, folding his hands. "Detective Locke, can you verify the footage?" "I can. I was there, and I was told to let it go." Marshall erupted. "You coward! You wait until now?" he snapped, standing abruptly, pointing toward Locke. "You're gonna throw away everything we built because of her?" He jabbed his finger in my direction. I stayed seated. "You think this makes you righteous?" he continued, voice rising. "You were nothing without me." I turned to Riley, leaned in close. "This isn't the fall, it's just the stumble." He glanced at me, then back at Marshall. "He's unraveling." Judge Carlton pounded the gavel once. "Sergeant Creed, control yourself. You're still under oath in these proceedings." Marshall opened his mouth again, then thought better of it. He sat, but not with grace. He dropped into the chair like gravity had finally caught up with him. The courtroom murmured, soft but growing. Whispers passed like static. Eyes shifted. The air, moments ago tense with uncertainty, now buzzed with clarity. I didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't look around for affirmation. I just watched. I didn't come for applause, I thought. I came for the truth to walk by itself. And for the first time all day, it was walking tall. The judge called a recess. Court officers moved to escort Marshall out. Not arrested, not yet, but monitored. They knew what it meant to walk with a man like him now. Knew how close his name sat to the edge of a scandal. He passed me again, a step slower. "This isn't over," he hissed. I didn't blink. "No," I said softly. "It's just finally started." The hallway outside the courtroom echoed with the sound of heels, whispered questions, and camera shutters. I didn't pause to answer any of them. I kept walking, not fast, not slow, just steady. The badge in my hand was small, but the message it carried had been building for years. Back inside, the court reconvened before the hour was up. When I re-entered, no one looked at me the same. Marshall's seat was now flanked by federal officers. He wasn't cuffed, not yet. But he wasn't moving either. His face, once full of practiced certainty, was pale. Not fear. Something worse, realization. I stepped up to the front without prompting. No lawyer introduced me. No gavel summoned silence. I was already being heard. I pulled a slim black case from my bag and opened it. No theatrics, no pause for effect. I just turned it so the judge could see the contents. Central Intelligence Agency, Oversight and Internal Accountability. Below that, the authorization letter with 3 separate seals. "Ms. Quinn," Judge Carlton said carefully, "are you prepared to present your findings?" "I didn't come here to win," I said. "I came to reveal." With Riley's help, I handed the judge a stack of sealed documents, each one marked with a different code, each one authenticated and already cleared for review under emergency disclosure. 3 sealed warrants, 2 from Justice, 1 from Oversight itself. Inside them, names, dates, timelines, chain of command violations, suppression of internal complaints, evidence mishandled or buried. I wasn't just accusing Marshall anymore. I was exposing a network built on silence and favor swapping, where bad behavior wasn't punished. It was rewarded, as long as you knew how to smile at the right person. Marshall didn't say a word. Not anymore. Not with the agents behind him already checking their watches. The judge read through the first file for several long seconds before passing it to the clerk. Then came the shift. 2 people in the gallery stood. Not attorneys, not local deputies. Washington. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply walked to Marshall and presented a folded document. He didn't even unfold it. He just looked at the header and sagged. "You can't," he began, but the agent was already reading him his rights. He didn't resist, because what could he say? He had made his story airtight, but mine had been silent for so long, it had weight now. And truth, when backed by proof, doesn't need to yell. The courtroom didn't erupt, it exhaled. As they escorted Marshall toward the door, 2 more officers rose from the benches. They weren't there for show. They were there for cleanup. The woman beside the district attorney pulled out her phone. The judge raised a hand, and she put it down again. I turned toward the room. Not just the people on the record, but the ones who had watched all this happen. Some had chosen not to act. Others hadn't known how. Either way, they were part of it. I spoke clearly, evenly. "The silence you all kept," I said, "wasn't protection. It was participation." Nobody argued. I didn't need applause. I needed acknowledgement. That was enough. From the back row, Lorcan stood slowly, holding a folded letter in his hand. His voice was low, but the room leaned in to hear him. "It's from her," he said. He meant my mother. He unfolded it carefully. "Don't let them rename you. You already know who you are." My chest tightened. For a moment, I forgot where I was. It wasn't about courtrooms or clearances anymore. It was about history, mine, and all the parts of it I'd been forced to bury, just to make others comfortable. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I saw a space where I had once been erased, now filled with quiet recognition. The session ended. The judge didn't call it a verdict. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require gavels. As I stepped outside, the flashes began. Cameras, reporters, microphones stretched toward me. "Ms. Quinn, what agency are you really with? Did you expect Marshall to be taken in today? Is this going to open other investigations?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe them anything. Instead, I lifted the badge in my hand, not high, not triumphantly, just enough. Sometimes that's all it takes. And somewhere inside me, not loud, not fragile, a voice whispered, "Sometimes the only justice you get is the kind you make." When the cameras stopped flashing and the hallway thinned out, I stayed. The sidewalk outside the courthouse had turned quiet again, just another stretch of concrete in a city that barely remembered what happened an hour ago. People passed, some on phones, some holding coffee, some with children in tow. Life resumed, as if justice hadn't just been whispered instead of declared. I found a spot on the old stone steps, tucked my bag beside me, and just sat. The wind nudged the hem of my coat. I didn't cry. But the silence pressed in differently now, less like isolation, more like space I had finally earned. It was over, but nothing was restored. And that was the part no one ever prepared you for. I reached into my coat pocket and unfolded the letter. The creases had become soft from handling, corners curled, the ink faded slightly. It was my mother's handwriting. "You don't need their permission to exist," it said. "You don't need their forgiveness to move forward. Don't wait for their validation. You are already enough." I traced the last line with my thumb. She hadn't written my name. She hadn't said, "Love, Mom." Just left it unsigned, as if she knew the signature wasn't what mattered. I folded the paper again and placed it back in the envelope. Across the street, a mail truck idled. It reminded me of what I still had to do. I stood up, walked slowly toward my rental car, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need a soundtrack. At the first mailbox, I dropped in an envelope addressed to my aunt, Lorraine. The second went to my cousin Nina. The third, to my father. Each letter was handwritten. No copies, no accusations, just the truth in my words. Not for argument, not for debate. Just clarity. I didn't expect responses. I didn't need them. The fourth letter I slipped under a nursing home window, taped it gently to the glass. The man behind the curtain stared blankly until his eyes caught the name in the corner. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away. Sometimes acknowledgement is quieter than apology. When the last letter was delivered, I headed home. It was dusk by then. Streetlights flickered on before the sun had fully dipped. Familiar shadows welcomed me at the apartment door. Inside, everything was where I left it. The couch still sagged slightly on one side. My kitchen smelled faintly of mint tea. The framed photo of my mother, taken long before her smile had to be earned, watched me from the bookshelf. I put the kettle on. No celebrations, no visitors, just the quiet company of my own breath and the dull hum of the fridge. I sat at the kitchen table, mug between my palms, the warmth grounding me. People think vindication feels like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like air returning to a room that's been sealed shut too long. Winning doesn't always mean restoring. Sometimes it just means refusing to be erased. I took a sip of tea, glanced toward the fridge, and smiled for the first time all day. Taped there with a purple magnet was a piece of paper, crayon drawings, uneven lines. A stick figure woman with a cape and big hair. Next to her, a child with pigtails and a speech bubble. "You're my hero," it said. Below the sketch, in uneven handwriting. "Don't be afraid, Auntie." It didn't have a return address, but I knew who sent it. And somehow, that was enough. Sometimes the justice we wait for never arrives the way we imagine. It doesn't come with applause or closure, or everyone finally admitting they were wrong. Sometimes it's simply the choice to stop waiting and to speak your truth anyway. Have you ever been erased from your own story, only to find the courage to rewrite it? If this story moved you or reminded you of something buried deep, tell us in the comments below. We're listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, human-centered stories like this. Because some truths deserve to be told out loud.